So I want to understand how the brain works, and because science is often about details, we have to break the very big question down into smaller questions. Sometimes that can be really frustrating. So I have to try to remember to think about the big picture all of the time, even while we're working on smaller aspects of the problem. So I think one of the things that I really focus on is that we need to be driven by this innate curiosity and this desire to understand, but we also need to make sure that we are doing it in a way that is rewarding and fun on a daily basis. So my first research experience was when I was an undergraduate, and I'll never forget the first time I walked into the laboratory of one of the faculty members at my college. And I walked in and there was an experiment going in the lab, and I looked and I saw a fish in a tank, and I heard these popping sounds over the loudspeaker, and I realized that that sound I was listening to was actually the activity of a neuron inside this fish's brain. And even though at that point I had been studying neuroscience for 2 years and I loved it already, it was almost like a magical experience to actually hear neural activity for the first time, and it took my breath away, and I ended up working in that laboratory for the next 3 years. And everything I learned then really shaped the way that I think about the brain and how I do science. One of the most important lessons that I've learned throughout my training is how to deal with disappointment and frustration and even failure. When I was first doing my PhD, there were very difficult times, and I didn't know how I would ever end up with a successful result at the end of the experiments that I was doing, and this lasted for years. So one of the things, I think it was important for me to go through that, and I learned how to be resilient, how to change my approach, how to think differently about a problem when I was stuck. And that has really allowed me to recognize now when I get stuck again that I know that I've felt this way before, and if I put my mind to it and try to think of a fresh perspective and try a different angle, that I can get through it. But it's also really important, I think, to learn to fail and to be okay with that. I think a lot of us who go into science are used to doing very well in school. We're overachievers. We care a lot about our own personal success. And because science can be frustrating, I think that can be particularly difficult, and it's a particularly hard lesson to learn. So it's important to embrace that failure and then to dig yourself out of it. And then once that happens, it becomes easier and easier and easier to do it in the future. Many of the advances that we're able to enjoy, technological advances that improve our quality of life, have emerged from first curious people just trying to understand the world. So in that sense, I think basic research has been really fundamentally important for improving the human condition in general. Much of our work is funded by the public, and so we also have an obligation to try to communicate our work openly to the public so that it can be appreciated and understood, but also so that it can directly benefit people. A lot of what we do doesn't directly immediately benefit people, but it's still really important to share our findings, to explain why we do what we do, so that society has a reason to continue to support us and to allow us the privilege of indulging our basic curiosity.